Welcome back to the Taiken Ramen channel. Today I'm making an exotic crab and dragonfruit tsukemen. I was inspired to make this bowl when I was at the grocery store and they were doing an out of season sale on crab legs. It had that seafood essence that was good for summertime with lots of citrus, sweet, and tang. Overall, a really good bowl. Let's get cooking. So for the broth, I wanted to do something that was mainly crab based. The problem is those crab legs at the grocery store were going for $40 a pound. I wasn't gonna go buy a bunch of crab legs and then make a broth that expensive, so I had the idea to sneak in some crab flavors using imitation crab, but that was going to require me to be very sneaky. I decided to make a broth out of 4 different components. First of all, I made a dragonfruit and vegetable stock to be a nice sweet base for everything. Second, I made a dashi out of kombu, niboshi, classic ramen seafood flavors. Third, I made a cashew cream, which brought a little bit of body as well as just like a sweet and mild flavor to the whole thing. And finally, I snuck the imitation crab in, making a stock that also included shrimp. Imitation crab gets a really bad rap. Overall, a lot of people don't like the look and texture of it, but just to make a soup taste like crab, we're gonna be fine. Starting with the dashi, that was pretty simple to make. 4 cups of water, 15 grams each of dried kombu and niboshi, and then 10 grams of katsuobushi fish flake. Set it in the fridge for 2 days, and I had a beautiful golden dashi that brought a lot of dimension to the soup, as well as that classic ramen flavor. For the dragonfruit and vegetable stock, I chopped up 1 dragonfruit, 3 tomatoes, 1 red onion, and then 300 grams of celery, and I had about 200 grams of shredded carrots laying around from the June bowl. I threw those all on a baking sheet, and then I roasted them for about 30 minutes at 350 degrees in my convection oven until they got a nice little char. After that, they went into a pot on the stove where I boiled them for about 4 hours on a low simmer to extract all of that sweet and tangy flavor. The cashew cream was really simple to make. I took an 8.5 ounce tin of cashews, put them in the blender, filled up the tin with water, put that in the blender, and then mixed it all up. The cashews actually brought more sweet than I thought, but that played nice with the dragonfruit stock, and then also was a complement to what would later be like the buttery crab topping. And finally, I made a stock out of 16 ounces of imitation crab and 40 shrimp with the shells and tails still on. I pressure cooked them for 2 hours and then strained them out and had an intensely aromatic imitation crab and shrimp stock. And then rather than having to stand on its own, it just got to fall into the ensemble of all of the other components of the broth. And that is super sneaky broth complete. Because there was so much going on in the broth, the tare didn't really need to be that complicated. I decided to go with a sofrito after discussing with Darth Ramen Wednesday. I chopped up a dragonfruit into little 1-inch cubes and then also peeled and chopped up a lemon. I put those in a high-walled baking dish and then covered in 1 cup of oil and put them in a 250 degree Fahrenheit oven for about 4 hours. What that achieved was a really sort of slow roast / fry. The oil did a lot to extract flavors and mix them up between the lemon and the dragon fruit. I strained off the excess oil because 1 cup was way more than needed just to make the sofrito, and that extra oil had a little bit of dragon fruit and lemon flavor to it, which is great because after I cooked the noodles, I tossed them in that oil in order to prevent sticking in the bowl. And there you have it. That's tare complete. For the noodles, I had recently got a 2mm square cut ramen noodle cutter. So I used Gonya's calculator and I calculated out a 38% hydration noodle with a 5% tapioca adjunct for extra slurpiness. And I used all sodium konsui in order to give this noodle a really soft bite. I laminated it twice while rolling out, and then I measured it with my new calipers to make sure it was exactly 2mm before putting it through the cutter. These noodles cooked for 1 minute, at which time I coated them in that lemon dragonfruit sofrito oil to stop them from sticking to each other, and then they were ready for the bowl. Noodles complete. For the aroma oil in this bowl, I made not 1, not 2, but 3 aroma oils. and that's mainly because I had three purposes for them. I wanted one oil to toss the noodles in order to stop them from sticking, and I wanted that to be light, not very flavorful. That's where the sofrito dragon fruit lemon oil came in. Perfect. Next, I wanted something to add to the broth to make it a touch spicier and just a little complex. I had Szechuan oil sitting around from the Tantan Men 2.0 video that I had bought online, so that was oil number 2. And then thirdly, you just can't have crab without having lemon butter with it. But also, I didn't want to just melt butter, squeeze a lemon, and say done. So I decided to elevate this aroma oil in the same way that I did my farm to table aroma oil. I took some local butter, I clarified it by making brown butter and then pulling out the milk solids. With that, I added some dried lemon peel. As opposed to using lemon juice, the dried lemon peel brings a little bit of a bitter note, which makes things just slightly more dimensional and complicated. And then clarifying the butter makes it just a touch more rich as well, I think. I used 2 tablespoons of the dried lemon peel when I was originally cooking the clarified butter off, and then I put all that in a blender with 1 more uncooked tablespoon of dried lemon peel and blended all that together for an intensely aromatic and really fun aroma oil for this crab. That's aroma oils complete. There were 2 final components. One was a roasted tomato. I thought that the tomato flavor would play nice with the crab. Roasted tomatoes are really easy to make. Slice a tomato in half, place it open side up on a baking sheet, drizzle with olive oil and a little bit of salt, and then I roasted at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. Done and dusted. The crab, ironically, was the easiest part of the bowl to make. I got a giant pot of water boiling and threw the crab legs in for 5 minutes and then pulled them out. I used some chopsticks to pull the meat out of the shell, and it was ready to go in the bowl. That simple. That's extra toppings complete. Now we're ready to assemble. I started by boiling the noodles for 1 minute and then tossing in that light lemon and dragon fruit sofrito oil, and then I actually hung them over a long chopstick draped over a wide-mouthed bowl. And as the noodles cooled down in that position, it really encouraged them to maintain their fold, which is awesome. You'll see in a second when I put them in the bowl. But while the noodles were hanging out, I set to assembling the broth piece by piece. I started with half a tablespoon of the spicy Szechuan oil, and then I added a few good squeezes of lemon. I put in 2 heaping tablespoons of our dragon fruit and lemon sofrito, 1 teaspoon of salt, about 2 tablespoons of cashew cream, and then 100 milliliters of our golden seafood dashi. At this point, I had the imitation crab and shrimp broth, as well as the dragon fruit and vegetable stock, heating up separately on the stove, and I added the noodles to their own bowl with a delicate sliced lemon and dragon fruit topping, then 300 milliliters each of the dragon fruit vegetable broth and imitation crab and shrimp stock went into the broth bowl, and I whisked everything together. Into the broth bowl went the roasted tomato, as well as a decorative crab claw. Into the noodle bowl, I put the crab meat, followed by a sheet of nori, and then I finished off the noodles and crab with a couple of heaping tablespoons of our luscious browned butter and lemon peel aroma oil. And then it was time to eat. It was actually sort of hard to get going because I was so proud of the presentation of this bowl, I didn't want to disturb it, but a season for everything, right? Initial impressions of the bowl. Of course, the crab that cost $40 a pound was amazing. Holy shit. Crab has that great flaky texture, it's got deep flavor, and the slightly bitter but very rich aroma oil was just mwah. Especially after you dipped it in the broth, it was ultra rich, which was why it was really nice to take a big slice of dragon fruit and then cleanse your palate between bites. I was getting the seafood notes I had incorporated, I was getting citrus, I was not getting imitation crab from the bowl, which was excellent. I really enjoyed the flavor and look of the roasted tomato. Unfortunately, it didn't really have much to do with the rest of the bowl. I think that the olive oil that I put on it really threw it off course. So overall, that roasted tomato was giving delicious, but also just happy to be included. Not really sure why I'm here. But anything in the bowl, whether it was the dragon fruit, the noodles, the crab meat, as soon as it touched the broth really tied everything together, and the cashew cream did a good job of helping the broth to coat whatever went in it. Overall, I did end up just drinking the broth, which I think is an indicator that maybe it was a touch under-seasoned or not thick enough. Normally, I wouldn't expect to drink the Tsukemen broth when I was done, but but this stuff was just delectable and I could not help myself. And final notes would be that the noodles, while the cut was very satisfying and the tapioca did make them nice and slurpy, they turned out brown, which I wasn't expecting. And I think that was the consequence of using the farm to table flour from Marion Milling from a few videos ago. They tasted great, but I was hoping for something a little lighter in color, so I'll have to do some more research before making more noodles. After the tribulations of the slightly too hot buffalo wing ramen last month, and then before that I had the slightly too rich and fatty farm to table bowl the month before that, and then of course the 420 bowl we don't even need to talk about. It was nice to just have a hit after that sort of dry spell. This bowl had the look, it had the flavor, it fit with summertime, and most of all, it was easy. Now, I will say the cost prohibitive. Dragonfruit was going for over $5 a pound. The crab legs were going for about $40 a pound, so that was a lot. But if you have a special occasion and you're going to spend the money anyway, this is a really fun dish to make and will definitely impress your guests. So thanks for joining me for another bowl. It was a pleasure cooking for you. If you're still watching, then please consider subscribing for more long-form content. I've got something really special planned for next month, and I can't wait to see you then. See ya.